And joining us now, the 24th Premier of the province of Ontario, Dalton McGuinty. It's good to have you back in that chair.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
How's life?
Very good, thanks.
How come?
I have no idea. It's just...
That's not supposed to be a tough question.
It's not supposed to be a tough question. I know what you mean, but whenever I'm starting to feel in any the least way sorry for myself, I do a bit of travel abroad. And I have yet to meet another leader who wouldn't gladly exchange our challenges and our opportunities for theirs.
Well, let me start with that, because you were abroad very recently. You went to the Middle East, you went to the West Bank, Israel, Lebanon. And why don't I ask you what the most significant thing you learned in perhaps the most troubled part of the world, having left there?
It's complicated. Very little geography and a lot of history. And we deliberately chose to visit Israel. We were drawn there because of the masterful way they have created an innovation-based economy. On a per capita basis, Steve, I don't think anybody's got more patents and copyrights and startups and Nobel Prize winners and the like.
Violinists and poets too, apparently.
Yeah, they are. You know, necessity being the mother of invention, they are really successful in a number of areas. But we also visited the West Bank to get an understanding of some of the challenges associated with people living there. And we also, beyond that, went to Lebanon as well to get a better sense. So it is complicated. There is, and I think it's really important for us to continue to find ways to connect, to engage, to trade, to understand the culture, to understand the complexity.
What's the biggest challenge of living in the West Bank today?
Well, I think it's economic. I think most families, Steve, the more I travel, the more, you know, I always get briefed on how different everybody else is. You can't talk about this, you got to be careful about this, using your sense of humor there and all that stuff. I ignore that completely. Here's what I've discovered. People are the same everywhere. If you knock on 100 doors in the West Bank, you knock on 100 doors inside Israel, and you ask those people with the greatest stake in the future, parents, what their greatest priorities are, they'll all tell you the same thing. We want good schools for our kids. We want good health care for everybody in the family. We want a strong economy that supports good jobs. We want a safe and clean environment, and we want to live in a world of peace. And if you begin with that understanding, I think there's a lot that we can bring to the table as Ontarians and Canadians in trying to build on that common ground.
When you saw, as the world did, what happened with that flotilla and the, you know, obviously tragic results of all of that, does it make you, I mean, let's face it, basically the international community has decided that Israel was at fault there. Does it make you second guess whether or not you want to have dealings with that country?
No, not at all. I think it's really important for us to find ways to engage. If we seek to influence, and we don't do so on the basis of power and financial clout, if we seek to exercise any moral influence, then we're going to have an open line of communication, and I think that's really important for us.
Canadian political leaders, though, I don't have to tell you, have gone over there in the past and stepped in all sorts of stuff, because unlike what you just told us, they tried very hard to stick to the script, but they couldn't and got into trouble. Did you not find that was a problem for you?
Well, I think if you come back to this notion of common ground, the shared values, shared aspirations, you're in a pretty safe place.
Provincial politicians don't normally talk international affairs, but this is a small world now, and you've always talked about trying to make Ontario more open to the world.
Right.
Are there problems over there, things that we need to know about over here?
Yes, they are. We no longer enjoy the luxury of saying we are a subnational government and will let all international issues and complexities of the global economy, we'll let those become remain the province, so to speak, of the federal government.
So when you're over there, do you talk terrorism to Palestinian leaders, and do you talk respect for human rights to Israeli leaders?
I didn't get into that with them. This was a first visit. You know, you've got to, I've been to China and India a number of times, and so that gives you greater moral authority to weigh in on different issues, but this is my first time over. And as a guest, so to speak, I think my responsibility is to build that strong initial relationship, and that gives you, you know, authority over time to broach more sensitive subjects.
And now that you've been there, would you say that this is the most impossible international relations crisis anywhere in the world?
It is.
I mean, are they ever going to solve that?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist, and both by natural inclination, and I think that's part of our responsibility in positions of leadership. People can be negative and pessimistic on their own. They look to us to be optimistic, give them reasons to be optimistic, but I'm convinced that over time, and if we can find a way to give expression to those fundamental aspirations of families, they're the same everywhere. Give me some good schools. Give me quality health care. Give me a world that's at peace. You know, the interesting thing, Steve, that I learned when I was over in Israel, and this is kind of noteworthy, is what I heard from businesses who now become proponents of peace, because
It's good for business.
instability and conflict is something that business recoils from. They want stability and predictability.
Well, on the issue of business, let's move to the economy here. And I don't know if you know this, but the new harmonized sales tax is coming in July 1st.
I've heard something
You've
about
heard
that.
something about it? Here's my first helpful question on that. I'm sitting here today, what am I going to ask him that he hasn't been asked 1,000 times before on the HST? So let me try this. When Tim Hudak beats you in the next election, do you think he'll take back the HST?
No, he won't. And the opposition have done their job, and I think a fairly effective job. I spent a number of years there, and it's an important responsibility, pointing out some of the challenges associated with the HST. But they won't withdraw it. They won't rescind it. No place has ever done that. The 140 countries and the 4 other provinces of all political stripes, by the way, because it's good, sound economic policy. And it's part of our comprehensive plan to make of Ontario one of the most competitive places in the world so that we can compete for and win new investment and new jobs.
Okay, work with me here on the windup, because this has got a couple of premises going into it. Before the 2003 election, which you won, that was your first win, you promised not to raise taxes, and then of course you did. You brought in that new Ontario health tax and you explained why you thought you had to do that. Before your second election, victory, 2007, when you were asked, will you raise taxes, you said, you know I won't. And eventually, we now know that the harmonized sales tax will take more out of people's pockets. I know there are rebates coming up initially, but eventually it will take more out of people's pockets. Are you concerned you have a credibility problem with voters on the issue of taxes?
We've worked really hard to ensure that the HST is minimally intrusive on family budgets. There's this transition payment. There are a number of new sales and property and energy tax credits. There's a permanent personal income tax cut. But here's a story on this. There are kind of 2 questions that are loom large every single day in my line of work. One is a very simple one. It's always put to voters by pollsters. And the question is simple: what do you people want? Here's the more important question. It's the one that put by voters to me every single day. Sometimes you've got to listen very carefully for it, but that question is, what do we need to do to grow stronger? We lost 250,000 jobs in this recession. What do we need to do to ensure there are more jobs for me today and my kids tomorrow? What do we need to do to make sure we have the capacity to support good schools and good health care and environmental protections and supports for our vulnerable? We need to grow stronger, Steve. Some people maintain that there's nothing that we need do, that the old world is somehow going to magically reappear. Our world has changed. The old world is not coming back. I wish I could say to Ontarians, there's no efforts that we've got to make. Nothing of any kind. We'll just sit here and we'll come back.
That. No, everybody understands that's not the way it is.
And I'm very reluctant to ask of Ontarians, but especially to ask of families. I understand how hard they work and how they count their pennies and how you want to save up a bit of money so you can have a vacation with the kids. You want to make sure you've got enough money for tuition. You want to make sure that you have enough money to retire on. But I've never met a mom or dad or a grandmother or grandfather who's not prepared to do what we need to do to make sure there are jobs for us today and jobs for our kids tomorrow.
But the question's about your credibility with those very people you've just described. Do you think you still have it?
I think I do. And you know what the great thing about the line of work I'm in? People get to make that judgment call.
Only once every 4 years, though.
They get to make that judgment call, but it's a pretty important judgment. And I will work as hard as I can. I'll do the best that I can. Always trying to find ways to ensure that we grow stronger as a province. Some of those ways aren't easy. I understand that.
Here's my next helpful question, which is, yes, there are new taxes, and there was $1 billion wasted on e-health, and there are public sector employees who, admittedly, in the last budget, got their wages frozen, but before that saw increases in both the number of jobs and in their salaries that people in the private sector sure did not experience. And I wonder whether you're concerned that there's a perception out there that your government is not careful enough with the public's money.
Well, we got elected originally in 2003 on a mandate which I think was pretty clear. People said you need to restore vitality to and confidence in our public services. So we have hired many more teachers, and we've hired many more nurses and water inspectors and meat inspectors. Crown's attorney and judges and the like. But those are all essential contributors to the quality of our public services, and by extension, the quality of our life. So yes, we have invested in more public services. But what I'm asking of our public servants now is, I'm saying to them, I need your help. We've been confronted by this terrible global economic recession, and we need to find a way to deal with some of our expenses. So I'm asking you to freeze your pay for 2 years. We'll lead by example. We in government will take a 3-year pay freeze, but for everybody else who's within the employ of the public sector and the broader public sector, I'm asking them to take a 2-year pay freeze.
Okay, but again, on the question, are you concerned there's a perception out there that you're not careful enough with the public's money?
No. I mean, there are some issues that,
This kind of stuff must show up in polls, though, doesn't it?
Well, there's people are always concerned about their governments and their accountability and whether they're using the money wisely. And on the matter of e-health, for example, it's just, I take responsibility for insufficient oversight. Governments have become so big and so complicated. We have so many agencies working for us. This was an agency that's working beyond government, and we have to bring the same kind of scrupulous oversight to agencies outside of government as we've brought to bear inside government. Having said that, Steve, it's unfair to say that it's cost us $1 billion. In fact, there has been a significant investment in infrastructure, the highways, so to speak, when it comes to this electronic record system. The complaint was, and it's a legitimate one, we haven't done enough to put money onto the vehicles back and forth that carry the information. And some people who were working with the system got carried away, and they lost sight of who they're working for ultimately. And it's not me. It's not the cabinet. It's not my caucus. It's Ontario families.
Well, I don't want to go too far down this road because we got other stuff to go to, but I mean, you put a big job in front of them, and I think their view was, we got to crack some eggs if you want to make an omelet.
You've got to, I think you've got to be aggressive, and you've got to move as quickly as you can. And everybody knows how important it is for us if we're going to put in place a sustainable healthcare system, that we've got to have an electronic health record system. But that never gives you license to do the kinds of things that show that you're somehow removed from the values of our families when it comes to being responsible with their money.
Okay, let's talk about educating young people today, I want to focus on one area in particular, because you just pointed out this province has shed 250,000 jobs in the last little while. If you were, well, you are actually, I was going to say, if you're the parent of somebody who's going to post-secondary, would you advise your kids to go into, for example, learning a trade around auto manufacturing, given how precarious that sector appears to be?
Well, I think there are going to be some great opportunities in the auto sector in the future. We've got a strong foundation of excellence. We're still the #1 auto producer in North America. Now, you couldn't judge that, of course. You couldn't come to that conclusion on the basis of headlines recently.
Well, you had to buy the company to keep that way, right?
We're still doing pretty well. I thought it was a sound decision given our circumstances. But there are some great opportunities there when it comes to more energy efficient and greener vehicles. But I think there are some exciting opportunities in other areas as well, whether you're talking about clean energy, for example, solar and harnessing the power of the wind and the sun. And clean water technologies, I think, is going to be ripe with opportunities for us. Going back to my visit to the Middle East, for example, I visited the ambassador in Lebanon. He hosted a reception for us in his home in the evening. He told me that every evening at 6 o'clock, the electricity shuts down. In Lebanon, as in most of the Middle East, not harnessing the power of the sun. We do that really well here. Also, he told me that they have to have water trucks delivering water there because they have a challenge when it comes to accessing clean and safe drinking water. We're really good at that here. So there are some opportunities that present themselves globally now. And coming back to something that we talked about a moment ago, Steve, we've got to look beyond our own borders, beyond North America, in fact, today, to pursue economic opportunities to create jobs here at home, and they're there for us.
Well, let me keep you within the borders for a second here, and I want to take you up north, because we take this program on the road a few times a year, and we were in Timmins earlier this year.
Right.
And one of the things that we heard over and over again in Timmins was, this guy's got billions of dollars to buy up car companies in order to save, good-paying auto manufacturing jobs. He's got hundreds of millions of dollars to lure video game producers here, or to keep film and television production in the big cities in the south here. Where's the investment in the north that could help, for example, keep the Kidd Creek smelter open, the mining smelter up in Timmins? Where's the money to help subsidize power? I know you did some of that in your last budget, but they would say not very much. They're wondering, you know, when do we get that kind of a deal? What's the answer?
I think that the last budget clearly demonstrated our commitment to the North. There were a number of things that we did there, whether it was an energy tax credit for Northern Ontario families, an electricity rebate program for our businesses up there. I sat down and met with the folks that came to that mining operation, the smelting operation in Timmins, and we asked ourselves what it is that we might do, if anything, to turn that around. But there are some global forces here. Sometimes we just aren't strong enough to contain.
It's not even global. It's next door in Quebec. They're
Well,
subsidizing power more than we are, and therefore they're getting the jobs.
But you know, one of the proposed solutions was that we shouldn't allow our raw product to be exported into. But actually, we import a lot of raw product. A lot of our jobs here in Ontario are based on the ease of flow of goods to and from. But there's some really great news. I'm not sure if you've heard about it, Steve. This area in Northern Ontario called the Ring of Fire.
We've heard lots about it.
It's going to be.
We've done programs
It's
on
going to be the largest mining find in the last 100 years. And our challenge is going to be to make sure that the raw product remains in Ontario and is processed in Ontario so that we can create the jobs here in Ontario.
Okay, but I know, and it's not the Johnny Cash song, I know, the Ring of Fire, and I get all that, but you're the same guy who a few years ago said, come on people, we got to stop, you know, making our way in this world by digging stuff up out of the ground and fixing it and selling it to somebody else. And now you're saying that's actually going to be our salvation.
Actually, we can do both. It's not a matter of looking for ways to shed the old economy. It's looking for ways to evolve and innovate within the old economy, so to speak, including our auto sector. It's a matter of finding ways to exploit new mining opportunities in a way that's environmentally responsible. And it's also a time for us to exploit new global opportunities, whether you're talking about clean energy or clean water technologies.
How about, let me go back to the auto companies for one more second here. Have they given you any indication when they're going to pay our money back?
No, they have not. You'll know that we had one loan repaid earlier than expected, but we're waiting for, working together with the federal government here. At some point in time, they're going to have an IPO. Shares are going to be made available, and we'll see what comes of that. But I think we need to be patient, and we need to be businesslike in terms of understanding when the time is going to be appropriate.
Let me talk to you a bit about reinventing government here, because your party recently had up in Collingwood a kind of a let's think about the future look at getting some new ideas, perhaps putting some stuff on paper that can help towards the October 6, 2011 election. And one of the things, Malcolm Gladwell was the guy who came up there, gave one of the keynote speeches, who talked about this is the time for experimentation, for collaboration, for bringing down the walls within government, because we have to be absolutely rigorous with how we spend taxpayers' dollars, and that in his view it was, I guess, big and small L liberals who are ideally positioned to do it. Are you doing any of that?
Yes, we are, and I really appreciated that advice. You know, one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to be confronted with fresh perspectives. One of the challenges, of course, is when there's always a danger, a risk when you're in government, that you start to think you've got all the answers. Somehow you become a repository of all wisdom. So you've got to guard against that, and you got to stay fresh. So we got some good ideas from a number of people, and Malcolm made a very important recommendation, and in part that is we shouldn't be afraid to innovate. Here's a bit of a dangerous word, and I don't want this to be taken out of context, but we shouldn't be afraid to experiment a little bit. We shouldn't be afraid to try something. And if it works, we can build on that success. If it fails, then we can say that at least we tried and we learned from that experience. One of the difficult things that I've had to contend with is we invest in new programs. But one of the things I keep saying to my ministers is, if it's not working, pull money off the shelf and let's find some other avenue for us to make measurable progress. So, and you know, that calls for a little bit of slack to be given to us on the part of our electorate, on the part of our families. If we're going to try new things, for example, you know, nobody's got all the answers when it comes to putting in place sustainable health care in Canada. I've heard from a lot of people, nobody has all the answers. We're going to have to try a few things. Some of those will work, some of them will not. I don't know exactly what they are, but we need just a little bit more flexibility to try things at this point in our history.
That, you know, to somebody who believes in Medicare, that may open the door to a whole bunch of different possibilities that you may or may not have intended by what you just said.
Yeah, that was not my intention.
Does that mean user fees?
No, it does not.
Doesn't mean user
No,
fees?
because that has been tried. and found wanting.
Okay, so give us another idea.
I think we need to be more prescriptive in terms of the therapies and diagnostics and treatments, because there are too many things that we know work and too many things that we know don't work. I'll give you one little example, if time permits here, Steve. If you visit most emergency rooms around the world, you're going to come across a little chart on the wall. It's called the Ottawa Ankle Rules. And after treating and seeing thousands and thousands of patients at a particular hospital in Ottawa, they determined what kind of physical symptoms and indications ought to be found before you order an X-ray. And so now people know when to order an X-ray and when not to order an X-ray. We don't want to order an X-ray for you if you don't need one, because for one thing, you want to get home. For me, as a taxpayer, I don't want to give it to you because it's too expensive. So we now have a much better understanding of when treatments and diagnostics are effective and when they're not. But we have yet, as a population, to understand that there are times when I should have this and times when I should not have this. So we're talking about being a bit more prescriptive, working with our doctors to make sure we have the appropriate kind of best practice protocols in place.
We've got about 6 minutes left here, and I want to just spend that time looking ahead, as I'm sure you do all the time. We're a little bit more than a year away from the next Ontario election, and let me put this thesis to you. Governments often get defeated not over big, dumb things, but little dumb things. For example, 1990, David Peterson's early election call. He didn't have to go that early, he did, he lost. Paul Martin called a public inquiry into the Quebec sponsorship scandal, got out of control, didn't have to do it. We know he lost the next election after that. What is there out there that may be a minor irritant, but could be something bigger that could be of concern in a year's time?
You know, it's very tough for me to predict those kinds of things. If I was to awake every morning and go to bed every night thinking about those kinds of things, I would be overcome by paralysis, because every day is fraught with risk and uncertainty. So notwithstanding the fact that it's a really complicated and a much more transparent world today for political leadership because of you guys and the job that you do, it's kind of a simple line of work. You do the best that you can. You try to do the right thing. If you screw up, and I will screw up from time to time, I think it's important to own up to that and put the kind of measures in place that correct that and ensure it doesn't happen again. That's really what it's all about. And you try to as hard as you can to stay connected to families with their hopes, their aspirations, and their dreams for themselves and their kids and as they get on later on in life too.
I want to follow up on that because I think that's very interesting. You've been Premier since 2003 now,
Yeah.
7 years almost. And you've been in politics for 20.
Right.
Leader of your party for 14?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long time to be, you'll forgive me, living in a bubble, which it is a bit of a bubble, you'll admit. You don't have a normal life. You're Premier of Ontario. You got people, you got OPP guys who follow you around. You don't have a normal life. How do you stay in touch with Mr. and Mrs. Everyday Ontario leading this abnormal life?
Well, you've got to work against that, because it can be a little bit unusual. And every once in a while, you get to do something completely normal. I had a son who was graduated and called to the bar a couple of days ago.
Congratulations.
And thank you very much. And I sat beside a lovely couple in front of us who didn't know who I was. And we had a lovely chat, just as parents, and talked about what the future might hold for our kids. So having a family keeps you grounded. Having 9 brothers and sisters, staying in touch with my mom, and doing whatever I can to kind of not lose my sense of who I am and where I come from. At some point, Steve, I'm not going to have this job anymore, and it's a wonderful honor to serve. But I'm going to go back to who I was, and I don't want that to be some kind of quantum leap. So I work hard to try to just be the same guy I always was.
How do you know they didn't know who you were?
Oh, because we had a nice chat.
Who doesn't know who you are?
Every once in a while, some lucky people who don't pay a lot of attention to politics.
Okay, I'll go back to the first question I asked you, which was about what might be out there that, that could trip you up. Tim Hudak, as you know, the Conservative leader, is kind of test driving this notion right now that Dalton McGuinty wants to tell you what you can do in your car, where you can smoke, what kind of dog you can buy, where you're allowed to text message people, all that kind of stuff. One columnist, I guess, felt a need to remind you that you're the Premier, not our dad.
Right.
Do you have your nose in too much of our business?
I certainly hope not, and I try not to do that. I like to think of myself as kind of a small illiberal in that sense, and I believe that you know, my job and the job of government is to create the conditions that allow people to flourish in so many different ways. So we've done a few things that could be categorized as being restrictive, you know, using a cell phone when you're driving, but I think that's just sensible. I think most people understand, if they give it some thought, that it's probably not a safe thing to do. We've been restrictive when it comes to smoking, but I think most parents would tell you they don't want their kids to take up smoking and the like. And so we've done a few things, but I think as well that I hope that people will come to understand our much bigger focus has been on quality of our schools and the quality of educational opportunities for young people and health care and environmental protections and those kinds of things.
We did a program here a few nights ago on the Common Sense Revolution, the 15th anniversary of,
Sure.
because June 8th was the 15th anniversary of Mike Harris's first election. And the one thing I learned in that program that I did not know before, that Leslie Noble, who ran his campaigns,
Sure.
fessed up to, was that after Mike Harris won his second election in 1999, when he defeated you, he was out of gas. Being Premier is a tough, dramatic job, and everybody found, they didn't say it out loud, of course, but everybody found that he wasn't the same guy. You're soon going to be asking us not to re-elect you for the first time, but for the second time, for your third mandate. How do we know there's still enough gas left in the tank?
Well, it's funny you mention that. My kids, it would say, 7 years may not seem like a long time to you, Dad, but that's 21 iPod generations. It's a long time. The world has changed a lot. But I think that the test that I kind of hold myself up against is, do I still have a sense of idealism? The environment in which I work can be corrosive. There can be a tremendous amount of cynicism. A lot of people will tell you that they've seen it all, know it all, done it all, that there's nothing more that we can do. But I still have a strong sense of idealism, a strong sense of purpose and determination and drive and energy. And I'm very ambitious for Ontarians. We enjoy a tremendous quality of life. And we're really lucky, you and I, Steve, to be raising our kids here. But there's still so much more that we can and should do together.
Who's going to be, I shouldn't say this in front, who's going to be ballsy enough to tell the Premier of Ontario, you know what, you've lost that sparkle, you've lost that sense of wonder?
Hopefully there will be people who will be strong enough when the time comes. But
Strong,
I think,
that was a better word. I should have said strong, yeah.
But my wife is a really good judge of it. I wouldn't do this job unless I was enjoying it, and I wouldn't enjoy this work unless I felt that I could continue to make a difference. It's not a place to just hang your hat and put your feet up and bide your time, especially now in a just-in-time world with so many changes taking place in a global economy. With the advent of globalization, there's never been a more exciting time to be a Premier in Canada, and never been more opportunities to find ways to grow stronger.
We are always grateful when the Premier of Ontario, whoever he is, decides to make a visit here to us at TVO. And Mr. McGuinty, appreciate you being here tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.